I heard an interesting quote from Yvon Chouinard, who is the founder of Patagonia, and it says, if you want to understand the entrepreneur, you have to study the juvenile delinquent, which is great, right? And the juvenile delinquents are saying, this sucks, I don't want to do it this way. I want to do it my own way. And that's totally tied into my story, but before I get too mired in the subplot, I want you to help me out a little bit. I've become crazy obsessed recently about how we as a community view and judge nonprofits. So do me a favor. In your head, picture a successful, effective nonprofit, okay? Just try to think of that. Now, think of the reasons why you view them as successful. I've found that people will view nonprofits as successful if they're really large and they serve a lot of people, and that stands to reason, right? We need those big nonprofits to do that. And the theme is certainly bigger is better. However, conversely, I think there's an environment in which being a small nonprofit is being viewed as an ineffective nonprofit. Like somehow they are on the lower rungs on the evolutionary ladder of nonprofits, or however you judge that. And I struggle with this because as the founder of an organization, I constantly wrestle with running an effective organization versus following that bigger is better formula for running an effective organization. And we're constantly asked, how many people do you serve? What size is your budget? What's your cost per participant? And that's such a frequent metric used to judge us that it seems crazy to question it. But let's question that, I guess. What happens when human services are being viewed and judged almost solely through this lens? Does this take away our ability to serve the individual? Are we supposed to make a decision at some point, follow the mission or follow the money? So here's a question I want you guys to think about. But there's also an issue I want you guys to know about, and that is each year, about 300,000 kids age out of the foster care system. Locally, that number is about 300. So in the state of Nebraska, you're 19 years old, you're considered an adult, and you're no longer a ward of the state, and you're expected to go live on your own even though nobody's really taught you how to do that, right? So to put a more personal face on it, one of our former program participants found himself at 19 kicked out of the foster home he lived in because they were no longer receiving a check for him, which is a very, very common occurrence. And so there he is. He's a teenager. He's homeless. He's jobless. He has no driver's license. He has no birth certificate. Now, that's a tough situation. And yet another program participant also finds himself homeless at 19, and this is after being born addicted to crack and entering the system and living in over 30 foster homes in those 19 years, and then exiting the system. So let's think about that for a second, okay? We're taking a teenager who's experienced one of the most traumatic events anybody could face, right? They're taken away from their parents, usually on neglect and abuse charges, taken away from their families, from their siblings, and they're entered into this system, and they live with strangers, and sometimes they experience neglect and abuse there too, and then we expect them to exit the system and just go on as if nothing has happened, right? Thrive like normal adults. And that's insane, right? I mean, why do we expect that to happen? But it continues. So nobody thinks this turns out, okay? I mean, we all could say this logically, but here are the stats that they face. 40% will be homeless. Less than half will graduate from high school. Only 4% will receive a 4-year college degree. The women are 3 times more likely to be pregnant by 21 than their non-foster counterparts. And most astoundingly, and I think most relevant to what we're talking about, is there's an over 50% unemployment rate. So compare that to the national average. What's that, about 4% or something like that? And locally, the unemployment rate is about 2.5%. So ask yourself, who's unemployed in a 2.5% unemployment rate? And what are the factors that are leading to this? Most likely it's the trauma they faced, right? That's what's leading to it. So the question is, how do you effectively serve somebody who has experienced this degree of trauma? And I think that's the algorithm people have been trying to figure out. So here's what we did. We started the Bike Union and Coffee, which is a social enterprise bike shop and coffee house whose sole existence is to provide workforce development for young adults who have been impacted by the foster care system. It works like a normal job. They get paid an hourly rate. They're the baristas at the coffee house. They do sales, service, and refurbishing at the bike shop. And there's also a whole host of core competency skills that we provide. So there's financial literacy, there's personal budgeting, there's cooking and nutrition classes, mindfulness meditation, book club, etc. And all those things, I mean, they're fairly easy to put into place. I think most people would put those into place. But we had, as an organization, we had this decision to make. We came to a fork in the road, and it was, how long should they be in the program? How long should each individual be in the program? Because study after study shows that the more time you invest into individuals who've experienced this kind of trauma, the more effective the programming is going to be. So logically, we would invest a lot of time into a small amount of people. But then you have the formulas. The formula is bigger is better, and that's what's going to attract the funders. Then we have to decide, well, what if we have to serve a lot more people for a less effective, a certainly less effective period of time? And I think that's where the juvenile delinquent entrepreneur part came in, was just like, well, I don't want to do it this way. I want to do it the way that we think we should. So we followed our instincts, and we decided that each individual is going to be served 20 hours a week for an entire year. There aren't many organizations locally or nationally that are investing that kind of time into individuals. But really, this program is it's begging to be individually focused. It's begging to be relationship-based. And for that to happen, it has to be small. It has to be genuine. And I think this is the crucial part, too. It has to not be based on pity. Because for the nonprofit world, pity is the basest emotion we have. And nobody wants to be approached in that lens. So why do I think I know any of this? Why do I think I have an answer or an attempt at an answer? And the question is, or the answer is, is that I have way more in common with the people I serve than the people who give me the money to serve them. My childhood is very similar to their childhood. So my parents had a very long, violent, drawn-out divorce that resulted in one parent leaving and me living in an unstable situation with a highly unstable single parent. We were very poor. We were on government assistance. I had to go without food on some nights. I had my first experience with intoxication with alcohol provided to me at home at age 12. I, of course, became depressed. I started to get in trouble at school. My grades started slipping, and I was eventually kicked out of my high school. That led directly to me dropping out of high school. And I could compartmentalize almost all of that, right? People are resilient. I could compartmentalize the violence. I could compartmentalize the food shortages. But what I couldn't take was the pity that people who knew my situation approached me with. I remember a police officer responding to a call at our house, and this was through no fault of his. The way he looked at me filled me with such shame because I knew I was a case of pity for him. And I spent my life trying to hide this aspect of what was going on at home, of what was going on with me, because I just wanted to be normal, right? I just wanted to fit in, and I just wanted people to see me as similar to them. And I use this approach every day when I interact with the young people at work, because that's how they want to be approached, right? It's not enough to just invest time into them. It has to be a relationship, and that relationship has to be based on trust. And if I approach it with pity, or if I approach it thinking about cost per participant, or the size of my budget, or how many people I serve, then I lose sight of the process, right? I lose sight of the human being that's right in front of me. Now, don't get me wrong. This is It's hard work. It's not easy, and there are a lot of things that they don't bring to the table, and that's why we are working with them. Anybody who frequents the bike union knows that it's not your normal coffee house experience. And there are so many great stories of customer interactions with the program participants, because the program participants are the front-facing part of the business, and that's important. And the interactions that happen they're pure gold, but truthfully, most of them aren't appropriate for the TED stage. And they wouldn't let me say most of it. But Rita let me sneak a couple past. So Alexis, one of our baristas, she made fantastic strides in her personal life, and she takes this gentleman's order, and then she says, "Damn, dude, you smell good as F." But she didn't just say F, she said the whole thing. That's just what I couldn't say, but he didn't mind, and we delighted in the situation. But there was another situation where Cassie, another one of our baristas, she was having what seemed like a really great heart-to-heart with this woman, and it was going on for a while. And as the woman finally leaves, Cassie looks at me and is like, "Damn, that bitch talks too much." But I like her shoes, so that was nice. But this is it. This is the magic you're missing out on, right? If you're not interacting with these people. I mean, you might get called a bitch behind your back, but they'll like your shoes. So it's win-win. But it doesn't work if the public doesn't come and support it, if the public doesn't come and have those crucial interpersonal communications with the program participants. And you don't have to be rich, and you don't have to write big checks. You just have to show up, and you just have to buy coffee. There are a lot of funders who won't fund us because we don't follow the formulas, because we don't serve, I guess, enough people. But I love this community because they completely prove me wrong, and that there are so many funders and individuals who are willing to support this, who are willing to make this a reality. And I mean, let's face it, like taking a gamble on a juvenile delinquent entrepreneur is a big thing, and I'm thankful that they're doing it. But I guess they see something in the program that they don't see elsewhere. So Father Boyle of Homeboy Industries says that we stand on the margins so that we can erase the margins, right? So there's no us and them. And taking it further, he says it's not enough to just serve people on the margins, but you have to see yourself in kinship with them. I see myself in the people that I serve, and I believe they see themselves in me. I feel like I'm the same as them. And we are not broken, and we're not cases of pity, and we're not units, and we're not outcomes. We're people. I want to tell you about one of those people. When Valerie came to us about a year ago, she was homeless. She was living in temporary housing. She was jobless. She had not worked in her life, despite being 20 years old. She played video games for 15 hours a day, which is hard to think about. She had such anxiety that she didn't like to interact with the world. If you talked to her, she would just wait you out until you went away. So she starts, and gradually she starts to come out of her shell and make some progress, but even a big rush at the coffee house would trigger her anxiety, and she would be reduced to tears, and she would have to leave and regroup and come back. But time goes on, and in about 8 months in, she decides to maybe follow some personal goals, and she starts eating better, she starts commuting by bike, she starts going to the gym, and she loses over 100 pounds. She becomes one of the best baristas we have. She starts to become a leader amongst her peers. She starts to become a spokesperson for the shop. She's becoming so outgoing. She goes back to school, and she gets her high school diploma. And now she has her own apartment for the first time. And that's success, right? We didn't do that for her. She did that. We always say we're the gunpowder, they're the spark. But we might be encouraging, but she did the work. And her story is no different than so many other stories at the bike union, right? So It didn't change the world, but it changed a life. I found that we put so much pressure on nonprofits to change the world, to be these big solutions, and that maybe we should temper our expectations just a little bit. It's okay for the machine to have some cogs that are small, I think. There's a social innovator, Jean Vanier, who started these wonderful small communities called L'Arche. And Jean Vanier said, I don't want to change the world. I just want to provide a little light. I think Valerie's story is a little light. And so is the story of Alexis and Cassie and Muhammad and Leo and Sam and Terrence and Brian. All of their stories are a little light. And with enough little lights, sometimes a small solution can end up being a really big solution. Thank you.